Welcome to Coast View, the show that every single day celebrates the men and women who are making coastal Mississippi such a great place to live, work, and play. Recently you've had the opportunity to hear some really good shows, and one in particular was with my friend Chris Nelson, who is the president of Bon Secours Fisheries over in Lower Alabama. It's in Baldwin County in Bon Secours, a little small community there. Back when I was over in Mobile as the president and publisher of the newspaper there, and then had the opportunity to lead the oil recovery planning efforts for Governor Raleigh, I spent some time at his place down in Bon Secours, and one of the things he pointed out is that it's not so quiet anymore. People are beginning to really discover that part of Baldwin County. But it was a great conversation. We talked about the state of the oyster industry today, the emergence of aquaculture, and all of that. And with that in mind, I thought I would invite my friend Anita Arguelles back to Coast View. Now, she actually is the marketing and public engagement coordinator at the Marine Education Center School of Ocean Science and Engineering for University of Southern Mississippi. But her husband and she are also involved in a very cool entrepreneurial effort called the French Hermit Oyster effort. And I'm excited about having her back so we can sort of get an update on how they're doing, and also find out what's going on in her real life world at University of Southern Mississippi. So without any further ado, here's Anita Arguelles. How you doing, Anita?
I'm great, Ricky. Thanks for having me today.
It's good to see you. So, Chris did a great job of talking about, the ever-changing face of the oyster industry. And what you guys are doing in particular, and how he actually called it kind of the white tablecloth effort, where these are they don't lend themselves to certain kind of applications, but man, they are incredible oysters, and they're very special. He talked about some of the genetic aspects of them as well, but we'll get into some of that here in just a second. But how is the French Hermit Oyster effort going?
Well, it's busy. We're busy out there working at the farm. In fact, I was hopeful that Mike could join you today, my husband, but he's at the farm shoveling around oysters, trying to keep them separated and help them grow and make sure we know what we have ready for sale in the market. So it's going really well. We stay really busy. And
Hey, Anita, let's remind people for just a second, when you say the farm, where you're raising them are in cages just south of Deer Island, which when Mike described this, except when you have a situation like last summer when there was just like too much rain, or the Bonnet Spillway, which is too much fresh water as well. Typically, oysters thrive in a scenario where there's a little bit of fresh and a little bit of salt water. And when the conditions are right, this is really a sweet spot where you guys are located, isn't it?
It is. We've got good water flow. And like you said, fresh water is important. Too much is bad, but too little is also bad. So, and what happens when you don't have enough fresh water is the predators increase. So if that fresh water kind of keeps those predators down, and oyster mortality, is lower as a result of that. So we are in a phase right now. The weather's been good to us, and so no storms yet this year, knock on wood. And the water is helping those oysters grow. So these oysters are actually hanging out. They're called single set oysters. So there's one oyster instead of a cluster. They're set on a little teeny tiny piece of microculture. And they're out there in floating cages in the kind of a mesh bag, and they're eating. So they're close to the surface, which means they get more phytoplankton than if they were on the bottom normally. So they're getting nice and chubby. And these oysters here that are growing south of Deer Island, they tend to really fill out that shell. So you can't hardly pack anything else in there. So some of the oysters, when you open them up from other parts of the country, they actually look, they kind of sink down into that shell, but ours are so plump, they just ride in on the top of that little shell, and they look like little fatties.
I was amazed when I ate them, to be honest with you. I mean, they were, first of all, they tasted incredible, but they were meaty, and the shell was slightly thinner, It was a different kind of an experience, but it was terrific actually. And when you look at sort of where y'all are in your entrepreneurial effort, are you surprised that the demand almost immediately was so high? Or maybe you weren't because the quality of the oyster was so amazing. But what's your thought about sort of where you are today and as it relates to the demand?
Sure. Well, I think the first thing we did as an organization and with other farmers is we went out to our chefs in Mississippi first. And we said, Mississippi oysters for Mississippi chefs. Because those oysters, those beautiful, curated, hand-cultivated oysters make a huge presence, and Mississippi is not late to the party, but we're not early either. So having these great Mississippi oysters, and so Mississippi chefs loved them. I mean, especially we see, our James Beard Southern chefs snack these things up first and put them on their menus. Chefs like Austin Summerall over at White Pillars, and like Vish up at Snack Bar in Oxford, and those were great guys. And then we also sell to Vestige in Ocean Springs, and so they're featured on the menu, and that chef does some wonderful things, creative things with those oysters. So that was the first thing we noticed, Ricky, when we went into the market. And then of course we had Bonnie Carey, and then the second year we had a lot of water, almost as much fresh water as that we had as Bonnie Carey fell into the Mississippi Sound, and we suffered again high mortality rates, slow growth rates, a lot more tending to those oysters than we would normally see. But this year it looks like it might be a turnaround year. So they're out there growing, getting fatter, and I can sell every oyster we can grow and then some.
Well, I've talked about it on my show many times. In areas as Mike knows, because he's around a lot. He builds piers and does other stuff. But what last summer was so unique. I mean, we went to places that would normally be. I'm talking about later in the summer, in August, that we could catch redfish and speckled trout, and we'd catch bass. And where we would see saltwater grass, it would be freshwater grass. I mean, you caught speckled trout out of the Berry Islands like you've never caught it before. I guess they were being flushed out of the bays in that direction. And I was actually exchanging notes with a friend of mine from Destin who lives on the water in the bay in Destin, and he was talking about how brown it was last year because it was just so much water there as well. And now it's so crystal clear. I had Joe Spraggins on recently, and he talked about the scientists at the Bureau are beginning to believe that, as we already knew, but it's very resilient. The bait fish are coming back really rapidly. The shrimp, the prospects on the shrimp season are very positive. The catch that they're doing now, they're really excited about what it means for the shrimp season. So we're learning, and you see this now that you're in the business of aquaculture, that the Mississippi Sound is an incredibly resilient body of water, isn't it?
Mm-hmm, it is. And these oysters, they respond so quickly to the proper conditions. So where you think, you putter along and your fresh water's high, salinity is low, and that's one of the key factors is that salinity is low. And they don't grow very much. They stay in their shell. They're not eating as much as they would normally eat. But the minute that turns, then that growth starts to accelerate.
And you're able to monitor that. You literally chart that somehow? Do you measure and chart it, or do you just do it by just observing?
Well, Mike keeps excellent records. He's a spreadsheet guru, and so he draws out each individual cage. He knows exactly what's in it, what lot of seed they were, and so he was showing me the other day some of the oysters and how they're tracking. Some of the ones he's out there working on today are 9 months old.
Yeah, I'm not surprised to hear that about Mike because, as you know, he's built a couple of piers for me over the years, right. And he's built some bulkheads for me.
And you've gotten his spreadsheets.
Yeah, he is a detail-oriented guy for sure, and he brings an engineer's mind to most every project, and I love the outcome. In fact, I had a floating pier that had to have some readjustments made to it, and he built a whole new system that I would have never thought about. I mean, he used parts from another something somewhere, and he just designed something that now works for future hurricanes. It's amazing. He's an amazing dude. But if I were going to pick a guy, if I wanted to eat amazing oysters, if I were going to pick a guy to grow amazing oysters that I want to eat, and given the people who surround him, such amazing guys in and of themselves, I'd pick Mike. Mike would be my guy. I mean, you understand why too, don't you?
Yeah, he loves oysters. He's always loved oysters. As much as he's loved Biloxi and the Gulf Coast, it's home for him. He's been wanting to do this forever. He's a recreational tonger, so he really enjoys that aspect of it. And I'll tell you something funny about him. He'll go to sleep with a problem on his mind, and when he wakes up in the morning, he'll say, "I solved my problem." So he actually works these things out and sleep.
That is so interesting. I do the same thing, but I'm waking up during the night, and I'm going to do it while I'm literally awake. Hey, we're having a conversation with Anita Arguelles. We're going to finish our conversation about the French Hermit oyster effort that her and her husband are involved in, and then we'll shift gears and go over to see what life at the University of Southern Mississippi and her part of the world is like these days. We'll see you after this break. I'm having a conversation with my friend Anita Arguelles. Her and her husband are involved in the French Hermit Oyster Company, and they are growing oysters, essentially oyster farming, aquaculture in cages south of Deer Island. And they call that the farm. And it is a farm for people who are in that business. I mean, it's the same thing as if you were growing soybeans in the Mississippi Delta, but in this case, they're leasing sort of this area. And they're growing wonderful oysters in cages. And they're not alone. There's a growing number of other companies that are involved in this as well. And Anita, I mentioned to you when I had you and Mike on the show that, and I also mentioned this with my conversation with Chris Nelson. When Anna and I went over to Croatia, I was surprised at how many aquaculture efforts they had going on in Croatia. I mean, growing in cages, some of the best oysters you've ever eaten, but I mean ours rival that as well. But this whole notion of growing oysters in cages is really not a new thing, so to speak, is it?
No, it's not new. In fact, it's been going on the East Coast in the United States for a few more years than we have. So it kind of filtered down the East Coast and made its way into the Gulf of Mexico a few years ago, and then Mississippi. Louisiana's coming online, Texas is coming online. So I think before long we're going to see this entire Gulf populated with oyster farmers, and that in Europe, years ago, they've been growing oysters on cables hanging down and in cages, and so it took its time, but it's finally here in the United States.
Well, I'm glad to see it. Hey, you sent a video that I'm going to post with this show as a sense of what they're doing on the boat. But what I see is there's about 3 or 4 guys on the boat, and they've got the cages that they brought up, and they're using sort of a high pressure hose. What are they doing in this video?
So Mike, he's an engineer, and he's a trained engineer, and so he's engineered his whole boat to hold like a little factory out there. So we've got a tumbler that come out of the water, go through the tumbler. There are holes in the tumbler, and the oysters fall through the holes, and the ones that remain and travel all the way through this pipe that's a tumbler, this aluminum pipe, end up in a basket, and those are a certain graded size oyster. Doesn't mean necessarily they're ready for market, but they're sorting those oysters, and then before they put them back in the bags, they'll pressure wash the bags with the oysters, because the bags pick up fouling. They pick up marine fouling, and so everything that is in the water wants to live on those bags and stay close to those oysters. So all kinds of little critters, barnacles, crabs, everything gets in there and wants to keep those oysters company.
That's interesting. And by the way, as Kyle normally does, he grabbed a little section off the video, and while you were talking he played it for the Facebook and YouTube audience. Kyle, you're the man as usual. I love when he takes those kind of initiatives. That's awesome. Hey, so anything else in your French Hermit world before we move over to Southern Miss?
Well, just that, we're not out there alone. I think that's, we Thank goodness we love to come and talk to you, but there's a lot of other oyster farmers out there, probably about 16, and we're all farming together and we're all raising oysters together. And there's a group of us that sell them as French Hermit, so it's not just Mike and I. It's a Hurricane Bob and Lee Family Farm and a bunch of other folks.
Well, I'm glad to see that. So, you're the marketing public engagement coordinator for the Marine Education Center School at Ocean Science and Engineering for Southern Miss. That's a big mouthful. What do you do in your day job?
Well, actually, I'm the content and brand manager for Ocean Enterprise here at USM. I moved from the Marine Education Center not too long ago. And then my job is to work in the blue economy, help attract people to come here and innovate and build their innovations and test them and refine them and market them here starting in Mississippi.
Well, I had Pam Moeller on, who is a terrific spokesperson for Southern Miss. She was a recipient of a One Coast Award, and we had a good talk about it. But what's interesting about when you mentioned blue economy, that whole notion of the blue economy is beginning to sort of infiltrate so many different conversations that I'm having now. One that I had recently with the aquarium, one that I'm, with of course, the mayor of the city of Gulfport, whether it's the Southern Miss or with Ashley Edwards at the Coast Business Council. I mean, this is a really important effort that's underway for coastal Mississippi, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's very important. More than a couple of years ago, USM started working on looking at the coast and what it would take to be a resilient coastal community and economic driver and keep our students at USM and other institutes of higher learning here in the state with good technical related jobs, with STEM-based jobs, instead of seeing those graduates go off to other states. So part of that and whole initiative and the launch of Gulf Blue, Big Ideas Out of the Blue, was to build that blue tech economy portion here. And so we have a lot of partners, and we also have, if you've been around the coast, you know that USM is spread across the entire Mississippi coast with assets. And so after Katrina, prior to Katrina, there was a strategy to build these assets so that we could attract folks that wanted to be in the blue tech economy. An example is the Thad Cochran Marine Aquaculture Center. That center is world renowned. It's here in North America. It's the best marine aquaculture, precision aquaculture center in the United States and in North America, working on marine species, including oysters. So that set the tone for doing research and attracting companies in to learn and then to go out and create their own companies or refine their products, like offshore submerged finfish, aquaculture.
Pretty amazing stuff. John Hairston, CEO of Hancock Whitney, has said many times, if you think about it, since the early 1990s when gaming came here, there's been no really game-changing thing that has occurred, okay? And the notion that a single segment's going to do it for us, those days are gone. So it's going to take a collection of efforts. I think Jerry St. Pé said it well when he said that complacency may be one of our biggest challenges, that this notion that Ingalls and Chevron and the blue chip industries over at Stennis are always going to be there, and that gaming is always going to be here, that we've got to be hitting on more cylinders. And I think the focus on the blue economy is a great opportunity for us to say, okay, now what falls underneath that? Lots of things fall underneath that. There's a real opportunity for us to take advantage of our proximity to the shore, the fact that leaders across the state are aligned around the blue economy, and then what's emerging in places like the Port of Gulfport, great opportunities for us. And then in addition to that, this notion that part of blue economy is about high-tech jobs. You pointed that out, that we don't want people to get greatly educated and then have to move away. The brain drain is killing us. We know that. Right. So the opportunity for us to attract them to stay here and build the kind of places where they want to live. I mean, that's part of our draw. I mean, we're in a affordable beach community, the most affordable beach community in the United States. So the opportunities now, if you think about the Business Council being aligned around this and the work that's going on inside the blue economy, even with all the other economic challenges we face, there is no rest for the weary. The opportunity is now for us to get strategic and tactical and say, in the next 3, 4, 5 years, we're going to increase our population by tens of thousands. And the opportunity is there for us to do that, isn't it?
It is. And we talked about aquaculture, but we also could talk about that port. The Port of Gulfport is home to USM's Marine Research Center, which was originally built in 2018 and supported our research vessels like the Point Sur. Well, we noticed we were starting to get interest from companies that were manufacturing and designing uncrewed maritime systems, which is, you think about ocean drones, and there's a lot of area in the ocean that we still don't know anything about, especially in the Gulf of Mexico. And so companies all over the world are working on unmanned system technology for marine uses applications, drones that are boat-like, they float on top of the surface and as well as underneath the surface. And having this facility down in Gulfport where we're attracting these companies in to refine their designs, validate their designs with federal partners, having all of that in one spot, and also adding Gulf Blue in order to bring these businesses in and grow them and help them get their products ready for the market. So there are all kinds of things that are going on right here in the coast of Mississippi that are driving the blue tech economy, and which supplements this whole blue economy.
And it's great to see the University of Southern Mississippi right up in the middle of it all.
We're very proud here at Mississippi, USM, about
so
everything we've done, and Mississippi's proud of us.
Yeah, I am, and I am too. I'm a proud Southern Miss graduate, and I think that when all the universities work together, and that's true as it relates to the blue economy, they all are working together. But Southern Miss has really put its stake in the ground on this one. That is for sure. This has been Anita Arguelles. Anita, have a great day. It's been a pleasure catching up with you.
Thanks for Ricky for having me on your show. I appreciate it.
You bet. When we get back, we're going to be joined by Laurie Jackson and a friend of hers from Ukraine. We'll see you after this break.